everyone, and welcome to Insider Insights. I'm Tina Beckwith. Now, for years, retirement planning is centered on savings, markets, and inflation. But new research from the LIMRA Retirement Income Institute suggests that consumers' greatest concerns aren't financial in the traditional sense. They're health-related. Rising healthcare costs, chronic illness, and long-term care needs are now seen as one of the biggest threats to retirement security. Joining me today is Chris Heye, PhD, a fellow at the LIMRA Retirement Income Institute, and author of The Growing Influence of Health Risks on Retirement Security. Chris, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Well, let's just dig into it. Yeah. I understand most people think retirement risk is all about the stock market, but you're saying one of the biggest risks might actually be our own decision making. What made you start thinking about retirement that way?
Yes, well, as we know, retirement's getting a lot longer. Lifespans are extending, and for many of us, that's kind of the good news and the bad news. We all want to live longer, but living longer these days can be very expensive. I started thinking about the importance of decision making after I had several personal experiences with older adults who were struggling with sound decision making. I mean, my mother had dementia, and her mother had dementia. So, we were fortunate enough to have the ability to remove her from the decision making process fairly early on after we noticed her decline in cognitive capacity. But I also unfortunately had some friends whose parents were lost millions of dollars through some combination of financial scams and poor financial decision making.
Yeah.
So this is about 10 years ago. So around that time, I really started to want to focus on this issue that I thought was not getting paid enough attention to around decision making and how older adults tend to often lose their capacity to make sound decisions just at a time when they're needing to make somewhat complicated both healthcare and financial decisions.
Well, it's a really smart insight because, as you point out, when you get to be around our age, you tend to know someone, whether it's a loved one or a friend of a friend, that might be in that situation. So, I'm curious, as your research suggests, that retirement gets much more complicated right when people may be less equipped to handle really complicated decisions. Feels a bit backwards. So what are your thoughts on how do we end up here?
Yeah, I think part of the reason we ended up here is, again, we're living longer. So many people living 10, 20 years or more beyond the traditional age of retirement. But most of us, unfortunately, start to experience some significant declines in our health, both our physical health and our cognitive health during those periods. And medical research has done a great job of keeping us alive and helping us live longer. But frequently, we live in this sort of more compromised state where our health is declining, and especially our cognitive capacity is declining. There's plenty of studies that suggest that virtually all of us are going to lose some ability to make sound decisions as we get older. And that presents what I think is kind of a new and again, not well enough studied effect and influence on our retirement, because because we're living longer, we have to make more decisions. We have to make decisions into our 60s and 70s and 80s that we didn't have to make previously. And these decisions can be very, very consequential.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, as you talk about those age bands, right? I know that you've also explored how financial decision making and your ability to make those decisions may actually peak around the age of 53 and decline afterwards. I have to admit, for those of us who are looking at 53 in the rearview mirror, it's a bit concerning. What are the implications of that finding for how advisors and institutions can engage with consumers approaching retirement?
Yeah, I was a little surprised by that research as well. We all want to think our capacity will, peak at 73, or maybe we'd settle for 63. But there was a major study that suggested it was more closer to 53, and there's also been other research that implies that the peak age of financial decision making for most of us is sometime in our 50s. So that means, our ability to make the best possible financial decisions starts to decline well before we reach the typical age of retirement. And that poses a whole bunch of issues, and it's something that I think financial professionals, need to be made more aware of. Another finding from these studies about cognitive decline is financial decision making is actually one of the first skills to go for many of us. And so the implication of that is that financial professionals, in many ways, are on the front lines of monitoring for suboptimal financial decision making. They may see declines in cognitive capacity in their clients before their clients' doctors do. So it really puts more onus on financial professionals to monitor these changes and to really be perhaps a little bit more open about discussing them with their clients than they have been in the past.
Yeah, and I can imagine, to your point, it's not only financial professionals, but there can be subtle signs that family and loved ones can pick up on, like missed bills or credit deteriorating, that kind of disorganization around your finances. What should families, advisors, and again, the financial institutions be watching for before there's even a formal diagnosis?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of sort of telltale signs. Again, one of the most important signs is financial mistakes. Financial. I'm glad you mentioned organization, because I think that's also an underappreciated um, side effect of cognitive decline. Is people tend to get a little bit more disorganized. Part of what happens as we get older, what's called our executive function, that part of our brain that helps us plan and organize, that starts to weaken. So once people start to get, if you know somebody who's been really organized and really together, and it seems like they're forgetting things, or they're losing track of stuff, or they just seem a little bit, disorganized, that's a real sign. I mean, there are other signs too. Just how people talk, how people appear. I mean, if someone who previously has been very articulate is now, struggling to find words or struggling to put coherent sentences together, that's a real sign. Or if they get, lost driving to your office, that's a sign. So there are these things that advisors and family members can look out for, and again, a lot of them are, kind of really basic stuff. I think one thing that this suggests is the importance of just kind of consistent monitoring, both by family members and by financial professionals. Because another thing that happens, and I saw this with my mother, is that sometimes these changes can occur really quickly. Like people can have, seem cognitively together, and then kind of all of a sudden they just their capacity drops. So I think if you're, especially if you're a family member, and if you're concerned about a parent or a sibling or a spouse even, try to keep an eye on them, try to keep in communication. And same for financial professionals. I always say that, one of the best things to do is just stay in touch.
Yeah, and
And if you're a financial professional, just stay in touch with those clients, check in, how you doing, have a conversation, and do that kind of ongoing monitoring.
yeah, I have an appreciation for the fact that you're describing probably a lot of what we would consider daily practices. I mean, I have a family member who recently had missed a few bills, and we became concerned. She's 81, and yeah, we thought those might be a sign. Turned out it was literally the post office that misplaced her mail, and she didn't receive the bill. So we were relieved, yet it was, I think, a really important checkpoint for us to sit down and have a conversation and just be honest about what was going on. Again, it turned out to be all was fine, but those daily interactions can be early warning signs. Now, you've also talked about fraud and the targeting of older adults. It's really exploded over the last period of time, and older adults have lost billions annually to fraud and financial exploitation. Why do you think retirees are such attractive targets, and what makes scams so difficult for them to spot them later in life?
Yeah, unfortunately, the scammers are getting better and better, and AI is only going to help them, especially with some forms of voice recognition. So the scams are getting more sophisticated. So that's something that's a really greater concern. And some of the reasons why older adults, I want to say this, not just older adults, younger folks and even middle-aged adults can be targets of scams. But older adults, again, they tend to lose a little bit of that capacity, those executive functions. There's some evidence that suggests that older adults might be a little bit more trusting than younger adults. There's certainly studies that suggest that they respond more sort of viscerally to sort of emotionally charged events. And then, finally, they just, they may have memory issues. And many of them also have overconfidence issues. So all these characteristics combined tend to make older adults more vulnerable to scams. And again, it speaks to the importance of, if you have an older family member you're concerned about, is that consistent monitoring. Ask them, hey, have you had any conversations recently with people that you haven't known before? Are you responding to phone calls from people you don't know? Are you opening emails from people you don't know? And then, obviously, are you giving money? Who are you giving money to, if anyone? Uh, Even if it's a family member, it's something that should be monitored really on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Unfortunately, it seems like some of those fraud and scams are becoming more frequent and certainly more sophisticated. But now, in your paper, you've also described that protected income products like annuities, um, they're kind of like a cognitive insurance. And I found that to be a really interesting phrase. Can you explain that concept and why you think it changes the conversation around protected income?
Yeah. So as we live longer, there's a lot of things going. We're living longer, and then also the sort of the landscape has changed. Most, unlike 30, 50 years ago, most older adults don't have a pension. They have Social Security, but basically they need to make more decisions. They're going to live longer, so the lifespan is longer, so they're going to have to make more decisions just because their lifespan is longer. But also planning for retirement and living in retirement is a lot more complicated than it used to be. Because again, we all have Social Security, but most of us don't have pensions. And now we've got these healthcare costs, which are much greater than they used to be. I mean, 50 years ago, even if you had a lot of money, there just weren't a lot of medical treatments around to pay for them.
Right.
So even if you had the money, you couldn't pay for these expensive cancer treatments, or diabetes drugs. They just weren't available. So now you do have these options, and so it means you have to make more decisions. And part of the problem with making all these decisions, especially as you get older, is you can start making bad decisions. Again, you can be defrauded. You can just make you're just more likely to make suboptimal financial decisions. And so what can happen is, for older adults, in order to finance their retirement, they may have to frequently go into their bank account and go to the investment accounts, log in, sell this, sell that, withdraw this. And I've unfortunately seen it. I know people who have made some really bad decisions. Just they just opened up their bank account, and then bad things happened after that. So the nice thing about protected income is that it reduces the number of ongoing decisions you need to make. So if you have that monthly check coming in, you don't have to every month go in and figure out what do I need to withdraw, what do I have to sell. So it reduces that sort of cognitive burden on you. And so in that regard, I think it introduces this idea of sort of cognitive insurance, where it reduces the number of ongoing decisions you have to make. Because for many older adults, unfortunately, almost any time they open up, they log into that bank account or log into that Fidelity or Vanguard account, it opens the opportunity for something bad to happen.
Yeah, and I think I love the way you frame that in terms of security, peace of mind, and how that uh, protection can really provide much more security and potentially financial freedom, right? And sometimes financial freedom can really mean that folks are staying in full control of every single dollar and every single investment decision that they make. But your paper almost suggests that there's value in putting finances on autopilot, almost set it and forget it, right? What does that look like in
Yeah,
practice for retirees and their families?
I like to emphasize the word safe. So you want to put on safe autopilot, but especially with paying bills. I mean, we see this over in older adults. You forget to pay bills, and that can have a lot of negative consequences. Accounts can be canceled. Your TV can all of a sudden go off. Your phone may not work anymore. Your heat goes off in your house. You don't have air conditioning. So if you can put, especially these bills, these monthly, these ongoing bills, just put those on autopilot. I think a lot of us do it. So a credit card, and just just pay it, pay it, pay it, pay it. And again, you want to make sure that those accounts are legit, and maybe have some help setting those up. But put that on autopilot. Put as much as you can on safe autopilot, because I think again, retirement, living and planning for retirement is complicated. So to the extent that you can simplify your financial life, you simplify your decision making, that almost always is going to provide some benefits, because it's going to, on the one hand, it's going to protect you um, from potential errors, and then it's also just going to free up your time, and hopefully it's going to lower your levels of anxiety a little bit, just knowing that things are being taken care of. I don't have to make so many decisions. I can go about my daily life without constantly worrying about, I
Yeah.
got to do this or I got to do that when it comes to my finances.
Yeah, I really like your emphasis on that notion of safety, um, because that's what a lot of folks are seeking, right? The safety, the security, the protection. Um, Now, when you think about retirement success today, and it's really about behaviors and emotions rather than just having enough money saved, how do you strike that balance?
Yeah, I think that's another underappreciated element of all of this. I think it's something that financial professionals, I'm sure many of them recognize this, but I think that financial professionals, almost by design, are good at managing complexity. That's kind of what they do. That's kind of their job description, and they may take it for granted, but a lot of their clients aren't that good at that. They're not good at it, and even more so, it makes them anxious. They worry a lot about things that financial professionals may say, oh, you don't have to worry about that, it's under control, but in fact they really do. So I think that just this idea of the ability to manage complexity and reduce complexity, again, reduce complex decisions, I think that that can have real kind of psychic income, and provide a real peace of mind. So as a financial professional, if you do nothing else than just reduce that cognitive burden on your clients, that's probably going to mean as much as more to your clients than if you beat the S&P by 3% last year.
Yeah.
So I think these sort of emotional consequences are really, from a client perspective, as important as the financial ones.
Yeah, agreed. And so this has been really insightful, Chris. Yeah, I'm curious if you could give one piece of advice to someone planning for retirement today, not just financially, but mentally and emotionally, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that well, there are a few things. One thing we haven't really talked about is there's also a lot of evidence that suggests it's really important to have purpose, to really have meaning in retirement. And so one thing I worry about with my friends, is that, or I've seen some people that if they kind of just feel like if they're bored or they're just, just kind of sitting around. Unfortunately, I don't. Most of my friends are not in that position, but I think it's really important to have goals, and they need to be, well beyond financial goals. It's like, what's gonna bring you joy? What's your purpose? What are you going to be excited about when you get up in the morning? And so I think that you almost want to start with those questions and those goals first, and then work backwards a little bit to figure out what if what are your financial, what are the resources you're going to need to be able to meet those broader, more emotional and fulfilling goals. And for some people, if you want to travel the world all the time, that's going to mean you need more money. But if you just if you really just want that, cabin in the woods in northern Maine, and that's what you're going to do, then maybe you won't need as much. But so I think that just having a sense for what's going to make you happy, what's going to make a fulfilling life for you in retirement is probably the best place to start.
Yeah, and that's such an excellent point, because as folks think about their purpose, and in addition to funding the everyday needs that they have, there is such a strong connection between those ideas and dreams along with their financial security. I don't know about you, but I do dream of retirement and being able to be up in the mountains every day. So it's yeah, definitely everyone's got their own dreams and where they want to go. But Chris, this has been a really fascinating conversation, because it challenges the way many of us think about retirement planning. It is so much more than talking about the markets and returns and savings targets. Your research reminds us that retirement is also very deeply human and deeply personal. And it's about how people make decisions over time, how aging can affect confidence and judgment, and how simplifying finances and decision-making can, along with protected income, provide not just financial security, but peace of mind as well. And, I think one of the biggest takeaways from today is that retirement planning isn't only about preparing your money for the future, it's about preparing yourself and your family for the realities that can come with living longer lives, changing health, and really a lot of increasingly complex financial decisions. So Chris, thank you for joining us and for sharing these important insights. And thanks to everyone for listening. Be sure to subscribe for more conversations on the trends and ideas shaping the future of retirement and financial security.